This is the 9th session of the Tanakh and the Halakhic mindset. We are now in the book of Bamidbar. To recap, we spoke about the beginning of Bamidbar, where we see the preparation of and the construction of a perfect form of government, the camp of Bnei Israel in the desert, where there's a clear sense of where each and everyone has to be, what are the boundaries, what are the responsibilities. After everything is presented in the first 6 chapter, the blessing of the Kohanim is presented, appropriately ending with the word shalom, which means peace, but also wholesomeness, perfection. Then, in chapter 7, we find the sacrifices or the offerings of the 12 chieftains of the 12 tribes, and the Torah repeats the same exact text for each and every one of them to show that there is unity and harmony. Then in chapter 8 the Levites are dedicated. Chapter 9 the Mishkan is put together, the camp is arranged around the Mishkan, and at the end of chapter 10 Moshe speaks with his father-in-law and says, we are now traveling. This is like the perfect, ideal state of affairs. Maybe the only time where we have such a description in the history of the Jewish people, especially in verse 32 of chapter 10. Moshe tells his father-in-law, if you travel with us, the goodness which God will bestow upon us will be shared with you. In Hebrew, the word tov repeats here 3 times. The verb tov, yetiv ve'etavnu. Then, at the end of that chapter, 35-36, there's a small section written between what is called the inverted nuns, a nun which is written backwards. And in that section, we read, Vayibisor ha'aron, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai ve'yafutzu oivecha ve'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha, as the ark traveled, Moshe would say, rise Hashem, scatter your enemy, let your adversaries run away from you. And when the ark would rest, Moshe would say, return Hashem with the tens of thousands and thousands of Israel. Those are enigmatic verses as well. Not only the verses are difficult, but the fact that they are framed within those 2 inverted nunim is problematic. I suggest to read it this way: the nunim are there as part of the rabbinic tradition. The rabbis wanted to attract our attention to the fact that Sefer Bamidbar is not the same before and after this paragraph, and that's why they said that this paragraph is Sefer Bifnei Atzmo, meaning that it splits Sefer Bamidbar into 2 almost unrelated sections. So, as I mentioned before, the narrative up to that paragraph is that of a utopian government where everything is perfect, everybody is in place. Even if there are people who are not up to the standard of the community, either physically or spiritually, they are being removed from within the camp and given time to heal and come back into the camp. But that's only an ideal or a desired situation, just as we read in Bereshit, the difference between the first and second chapter, where in the first chapter we see the ideal world, the world of God. In the second chapter, the world of man, where chaos reigns. So also we see here that all the preparations were made for the nation to travel as one nation in peace and harmony. But this does not happen. So what Moshe says, what the Torah says in those 2 verses, is actually an instruction of how to govern the people. And we will see, we'll come back to it later and see what is exactly this instruction. The 2 inverted nunim in rabbinic symbolism, in the rabbinic system of symbolism, nun represents faithfulness, ne'emanut. This is attested to in Tractate Shabbat 104:1, and there the rabbis say that the letter Nun represents Ne'eman. Moshe is the one who's called Ne'eman. He's the faithful one. He is the entrusted one. But even Moshe loses his faith at a certain point in the events that are going to unfold. So the Torah shows us that no matter how perfect the system of government that you are going to put in place, it could be even a divine plan, eventually it will rely on the participation and cooperation of individuals. And if there are individuals who refuse to cooperate with the system to create this perfect government, it will not be sustainable. So what we find here, we find is a rapid succession of cases of betrayal, rebellion, and lose of trust and faithfulness. We start with at the beginning of chapter 11, the people complain just for the sake of complaining. That is event number 1. The second event, the riffraff, and with them later on the Israelites join to lament the lack of the delicacies they had in Egypt, the fish, the zucchinis, watermelon, even hay, garlic, onions. Obviously, again, this is a complaint for the sake of complaining. So this is the second event. The third case where we could see a trust crisis is between Moshe and Hashem. Moshe turns to Hashem and says, "Why did you treat me so cruelly by putting all the burden of this nation on me? I cannot be their leader." And here Moshe uses the word omen, ne'eman. He says, "I cannot be the caregiver." This is in verse 12 of chapter 11. If you look closely, you see that Moshe says, "I could be a leader, but I cannot be a parent." We can't have this level of trust that there exists between a parent and a child, which in Hebrew, by the way, if you follow the system of the bi-radical root, where we look at the first two consonants of each verb, of each root, they are connected. So the letters Aleph Mem that are the beginning of the word Omen and Emunah, faith and caregiver, are also the root in the word Em, mother, because the mother represents the greatest trust that the child can have. She is his anchor and his solid center for everything he needs. So when Moshe says that I'm not the Omen, he says that he lost trust in his own abilities and maybe even in the ability of God to keep him as the leader of Am Yisrael. So that's the third case of disobedience. God tells Moshe to gather 70 people and to have them appointed as his delegates. And he also says that he's going to provide food for the people. And Moshe answers, "How are you going to provide food to all these people?" This could be taken literally, or that Moshe says, no matter what you give them, they will never be satisfied. However, it still is a case of distrust or loss of faith between Moshe and God, and this is case number 4. Case number 5, when Moshe appoints the 70 elders, there are 2 men who stay behind in the camp, and they are able to receive prophecy from God without Moshe's intervention. And this is where Hashem bypasses Moshe. This is the case number 5 of distrust. Following that, Miriam and Aaron speak about Moshe, saying he is not the only prophet, we are also prophets, we could lead the people. So this is case number 6 of betrayal. Following that, in chapter 13, we read about the scouts who went to Israel, who went to Canaan, and came back with a negative report, causing the people to rebel and to say that they do not want to go to Canaan. That's case number 6 of betrayal. So far we had the people complaining for no reason, people complaining, wanting food, Moshe complaining about his burden, Moshe showing disbelief that God could feed Bnei Israel, the elders prophesying without Moshe's permission, and then the scouts refusing to go to Canaan, following their report and following the punishment that God administers to Bnei Israel, that they will have to travel in the desert for 40 years. The Israelites decide to go to war without Moshe's consent. That's case number 7 of betrayal. Following that, there's a short break of laws that have to do with coming to Eretz Israel, coming to the land, as if to say that despite all these things, they still will arrive at the promised land. But then, at the end of Parashat Halakhic, chapter 15, verses 32 to 36, we find a man who transgresses the Shabbat publicly, and in chapter 16, the breakaway of Korah and his people. That's already case number 8 of betrayal, of distrust. So, with that, we conclude the quick deterioration of the ideal government that was suggested by God, to show us that even the most perfect government relies on the cooperation of the individual. And that, I think, is a leading theme in the Torah's and the Tanakh's ideology, that eventually everything boils down to you. It's the individual who is responsible. No one can say, I am not responsible. We have to shoulder the burden and to make sure that things are done right. We can never relay or delegate our responsibilities to someone else. And an ideal society, according to Torah, is not run by a king or a prophet or a president or a chieftain or anything like that. It is run by individuals who are fully committed to Torah mitzvot, and for them the government is there only to facilitate amenities, roads, transportation, etc., but not to control, because at the end of the day, individuals who rebel against the system could cause the downfall of the whole system. With that, we return to the two nunim. The reason why we have those psukim between the inverted nuns is the two, or the keywords are Shuva Adonai Rivavot Alfei Israel, return God with the myriads of thousands of Israel. The language myriads of thousands means that there is individuality and diversity within the people. We cannot force all to conform to the same mindset. We have, as a government or as leaders, we must give people the ability to express themselves. We see that also being reflected with Moshe's response to the rebellion of Korah. This is in chapter 16, verse 22. Moshe and Aaron referred to God as El Elohei Ruchot Lechol Basar, Ha'ish Echad Yechetav Al Kol Ha'ada Tiktzof. First, they use a very rare term to address God. El Elohei Ruchot Lechol Basar, the God of all powers, of all spirits, to all flesh. Is it possible that one man will sin and you will be angry with the whole community? This is exactly what the idea that I conveyed before with the words of Rivavot Alfei Israel. What they say is that there are hundreds of thousands or a great diversity within the people. One of them made a mistake. We should not blame the whole community. But they also say that the ideal leadership is El Elohei Ruchot Lechol Basar, one who understands that even though we are Kol Basar, in the flesh, in the body, we might all look the same, but Haruchot is in the plural. Each and every individual has a different mentality, different attributes, different qualities, and they have to be taken into consideration when trying to run a country or a government or whatever that will be. I will not enter into the story of Korah and his people, because we are focusing here on the concept of Halakha. I would like to address briefly chapter 19 of Bamidbar, which is the concept of the Para Aduma, the red heifer. The prevailing mentality among, at least in the Orthodox world, is that we do not understand what Paraduma is all about. However, if you look closely, you realize that Paraduma is a very meticulous ritual that is meant to help people who are grieving cope with their grief. It is probably something that was communicated to the Kohanim, as we'll see later. There are several cases where the Kohanim have a secret. The Kohanim or the rabbis, the judges, the shofetim, whoever is in charge, have sort of a secret code or a manual which guides them on how to deal with the people. In that case, the Kohen had a secret manual which told him how to deal with the mourner. The person who contracts impurity is a person who contacted death. To contact death means to be disrupted, to be shaken, and to lose faith in humanity, in life, to maybe lose a sense of purpose. And as a result, people who have a close encounter with death can sink into despair and depression. And one of two things can happen. Either they become completely passive, detached from society, uninterested in doing anything, or they become aggressive. Their negativity leads them to say that if they don't mean anything, if they have no value, life has no value, so the other's life has no value as well, and they allow themselves to kill or to attack other people. So the Torah wants to cure or to help heal that grief, and there's a highly symbolic procedure with the red heifer. If you look closely, you realize that all the elements there are symbolic. They are meant to convey to the mourner the message that yes, life is transient. We don't live forever, but there is hope. We should never give up because each one of us can plant the seed for a future life. The idea of that seed planted is presented when the Kohen the priest takes from the dust that is on the floor and the ground of the Mishkan, puts it in a bowl and covers it with water. The dust is a symbol of death. For you, dust you are, and to dust you shall return. And the dust is covered with water to show that the water overpowers the dust, and now there is a power of rejuvenation. Things could grow in the dust, and that is the message. In brief description, this is the message that the Kohen gives the mourner. I wrote an article about that. Those of you who are interested can look for it or email me and I'll send it. And in that context, I will say also that the famous statement in the Midrash about the word hukat, zot hukat Torah, this is the law of the Torah, and that the rabbis say hukah hakak tigzara gazarti ve'en lecha reshut la'arer acharecha. They say this is a law that cannot be understood. This is my decree. Don't second guess God. So traditionally, it was understood that this refers to the details of the ritual of Paraduma, that we cannot understand why those details are in place, why the red heifer could not have been performed in a different way. But I think that the original meaning of the Midrash was that death itself is a hukah, is a decree which we cannot understand or digest, and we should not second guess. And indeed, this is the big or the great enigma of life, that or the great threat or fear of all of us. We're afraid of death. We're afraid of its existence. We try to defy it or to cheat it, but we know it's impossible, and death is inevitable. And that's why the rabbis say, this is how the world is created. Don't second guess me. So this is the story of Paraduma, of the red heifer. From here we continue to the story of Bilaam. From the story of the curse that was about to be cast by Bilaam in Parashat Balak, starting in chapter 22, I think that the most important lesson that we should learn is that prayers are not an automatic tool. No one can sway God to do one thing or another in the power with the power of prayer, and definitely not when it's used for the negative. We see it here when Bil'am, with all of his attempts to try to curse Bnei Israel, fails, and the only way he succeeds eventually to cause their downfall is by causing them to sin physically. So this is important to say because I've heard people saying that Muslim terrorists succeed because they are devoted. They have this kind of religious devotion, and also people are afraid of all kind of curses and evil eye and spells that are cast on them. All this is complete nonsense. We see it here in the story of Bil'am, that prayer for an evil thing does not help. God will not cause damage to someone because someone prayed for it. It's not an automatic process, and it's not a machine. One of the reasons that people, I think, misunderstood this concept is a statement in the Talmud that says that Ganava apum mahtarta saleh, that a thief was about to break into a house, prays to God. They misunderstood it as saying that it's a good thing, but obviously the Gemara, the Talmud is being sarcastic, or shows the irony of a thief or a burglar or about to commit a crime and prays to God to save him. Another source that might have caused misunderstanding is that the Talmud says, "Bechol derech da'eu va'afilu dvar avera." Know God in all your actions, even if when you're about to commit a crime. Va'afilu dvar avera. So people read that and think that it means that one should pray or say l'shem yehud or some kind of a special ritual before performing a sin, but this is not the case. Davar avera, in that context, in the Talmud, is a euphemism for sexual relationships, obviously permitted relationships, and the Talmud says that even when one is engaged in that, he has to have some kind of spiritual awareness. At the end of the story of Bil'am, in chapter 25, we find the enticement of the Israelites by the daughters of Midian, and then finally Zimri ben Salu brings the Midianite woman to the opening of Oil Moed. This shows us, this is another example of the rampant practice of sacred prostitution at the temple. What Zimri was trying to say, it was not just about being with the daughters of Midian. He wanted to restore to practice the idea of sacred prostitution in the Mishkan. Following that, we have another census, and with that, that section of Bamidbar is over, and we segue into the laws of all the sacrifices for all the holidays, and of course daily sacrifices. Important here to note, as I mentioned before, that the Torah is extremely detailed when it comes to the korbanot, unlike the vague language that we usually see with other mitzvot. It's also worthwhile to read chapter 31, verses 21 to 25, where the Torah speaks about purifying the utensils taken from Midian, which this small paragraph is the only source for all the laws of kashrut and the kashrut of dishes in later literature. That again is chapter 31, verses 21 to 25, and after that, the only we could say the last halachic concept mentioned in Sefer Bamidbar is that of the city of refuge, Ir Miklat, to where an accidental killer should flee. We already mentioned it when we spoke about the concept in Shemot. I mentioned it again here briefly, that the idea of Ir Miklat is where we see the Torah makes a compromise with the current culture. It was not meant to be kept forever. We would not accept in today's society a situation where the relative of the victim of an accident would kill the person responsible for the accident. Rather, that system was in place in ancient culture, and the Torah knowing that it cannot be completely abolished, gave a solution in the form of a city of refuge to where the accidental killer should run away, thus basically handing himself into the authorities, but also protecting him from the relatives who want to kill him, want to revenge the blood of their relative. And above and beyond all that, the Torah creates this mentality of people knowing that they have to be very careful not to be involved in accidents and to assume responsibility. So again, we return to the idea of responsibility. In the book of Devarim, we're now turned to the book of Devarim. In the first couple of chapters, it's a recap of that's why it's called Mishneh Torah. It's a recap of what has transpired so far. The laws of Devarim, besides the Ten Commandments, start later on in chapter 12 of Devarim. You could say this is the first time we find a actual new Halakhic concept, that is the concept of Besar Ta'ava, the allowance to eat meat wherever one wants. From the language of the Torah here, from the repetition, the constant repetition of Ki te'aveh nafshecha lechol basar. If you desire to eat meat, you could eat meat wherever you desire. It seems that the Torah is not in favor of eating meat, and Torah says if you came to that extreme situation where you need to eat meat, eat it in that manner. That's just a general comment. That is also the basis for the laws of shechita, which if you look in the pshat, in the literal reading of the text, to not go line in line with the oral tradition, but we accept, of course, the oral tradition. This is in at the end of chapter 12 of Devarim. In chapter 14, we find Banim atem l'Adonai Elohechem lo titgodedu velo tasimu korcha ben einechem lemet ki am kadosh ata l'Adonai Elohecha. You are children, the children of God. You shall not wound yourself as a sign of mourning, or pull your hair to show pain for someone's death. That is these are two death or mourning practices that were practiced all over the ancient Near East. The Torah does not bother with the other practices which were similar between Israelites and their neighbors, but only with these two, because these are irreversible. Once a person wounded himself, the scar will remain. Or if a person pulled his hair, there will remain a bald spot, and they will be forever the marks of the mourning. The Torah is not the Torah of death; it's the Torah of life, and as such, it says you are allowed to mourn. You should mourn, but it should be a temporary thing, and then you should go back to live a normal life. Following that, we have another listing of the laws of kashrut. Basically, most of the halachot of Devarim are a repetition of halachot or laws that we already seen before. So I will just dwell here on the most important things that are exceptional for Devarim. In chapter 16, verse 18, the Torah speaks about the importance of creating a judicial system. Shofetim v'shoterim titen lecha bechol sha'arecha, asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha lishvatecha, v'shofetu et ha'am mishpat tzedek. The Torah does not speak yet of a central system of a judicial system, but rather of a local system. Shofetim v'shoterim titen lecha bechol sha'arecha. You must have a judge, a judicial authority in each and every city. And here is the key verse in the ideology of the Torah: Lo tateh mishpat, lo takir panim, v'lo tikach shohad. This is so important. If one would say, what are the top 10 halachot? This probably would be one of them. You should not distort justice. You should not give preferential treatment to one person over another. You shall not take bribe, because the bribe will blind even the wisest people and will distort the words of the righteous. The rabbis explain the Gemara, which I think is highly appropriate to mention here, that bribe could be even subconscious, one's a tendency to favor people who are closer to him, or to rule towards situation which favor him, is in many cases subconscious. Such, for example, the prohibition of the rabbis on a high priest to participate in a bedin that decides whether the year is going to be a leap year or not, and that is because adding 1 month will to the year will push the high holidays into the winter, and when that happens, the Kohen Gadol who has to work on Yom Kippur will have to walk barefoot in the temple in colder weather. So the rabbi said this subconscious knowledge would sway his decision. And as we go through halakhic literature, we will see that you could really divide the way rabbis answer halakhic questions that come from people into two categories. A question where an answer more, where the rabbi, the person who gives the answer, understands the situation of the individual who asked the question, or the community, whoever it is, but really identifies with the problems and tries to solve it. And in that case, he is not taking a bribe, he's not following prejudice or other considerations, and where there are external considerations that do not really appreciate the problem where that the individual is facing. One such example is aguna. The case of aguna, the rabbis tend to neglect. I'm talking about halakhic aguna, a woman whose husband is present but refuses to give her a get, and the rabbis usually, unfortunately, side with the husband and render the woman a prisoner of his unwillingness to let her go. But we could also look at the many examples of halakhic solutions which are available but are not used. One example is the idea of Rabbi Yitzhak Abadi to create an easier way of writing a Sefer Torah, an easier and more economic way. But even though most rabbis agree with him that there is a way to print a Sefer Torah on parchment with ink, they refuse to give an official endorsement for fear of the I would say the scribes union. Same thing when solutions are offered for shehita, for kosher meat or kosher chicken, the unions of kashrut block it, and the rabbis side with those unions, favoring the maybe the power, the money, the organization, but they don't see the need of the people. So this falls really under the category of lo tikach shohad, tzedek tzedek tirdof. You have to make sure that your decisions are unbiased. In chapter 17, verse 8, we read the following: Ki palem echad davar lamishpat ben dam ledam ben din ledin ben nega ala nega divrei rivot b'sharecha v'kamta ve'alita el hamakom asher yivhar Adonai Elohecha bo. This is a very important paragraph in understanding the role of the judge in a traditional system of legislation. The way this is explained in some of our sources is that there is a central bedin in Yerushalayim that overrules and decides, like the Supreme Court, that can override the decisions of any court. But I'll go with the literal meaning as we could read it from the pasuk, because when we deal with rabbinic literature, we will see the other interpretations here. So the pasuk says the following: Ki yipaleh mimcha davar lamishpat. If in your hometown there is a dispute between two people, ben dam ledam, whether those are matters of blood, meaning a question of murder, ben din ledin, or if it's a fiscal monetary issue, ben nega la nega, or if it's a question of physical damage that one person caused another, divrei rivot b'sharecha, those are disputes and fights between two individuals. That's why I explained nega la nega as a physical damage and not nega tzarat, leprosy, because if it's leprosy, it's not divrei rivot, it's not a contentious issue between two litigants. So the title, the summary of all these cases is divrei rivot. Those are fights or arguments between two individuals. Therefore, we must say that nega la nega means a physical fight or physical damage between two people. You have to, if your local judges cannot provide a solution, you go to the court, which is located next to the temple, which is the chosen place, and then you come ובאתה אל הכהנים הלוויים ולשופט אשר יהיה בהם ההם ודרשת ויגידו לך את דבר המשפט. Then the judge who's there will tell you what to do. And the key words here are אשר יהיה בהם ההם, the judge who will be the judge at that time. This, as the rabbis already pointed out in the Talmud, is unnecessary. Of course, you will talk to the judge, the contemporary judge, and not to the judge who already died. Especially back in the day where there was no written record of judgments of previous judges. So the idea that Torah wants to convey is that the only person who's qualified to judge on contemporary issues is a contemporary judge. Unfortunately, today our system is bogged down by precedents. Every time you ask a question, a rabbinic, halakhic questions, every generation need to quote all the previous generations. So if Rambam had to refer, Maimonides had to refer to halakhic literature of about 700 years of activity, when Rabbi Yosef Karo had to do that, there were another 400 years of added activity. And when a modern posek does it, another 500 years. So a posek who writes today sometimes had to look at the work of 2,000 years worth of legislators and decisors, and that definitely slows the system down. Especially when we come to situations where Hashofet Asher Lo Haya B'Yamim Hayim, the judge who was not a contemporary judge, who did not live in that time and day, cannot really voice an opinion. How do you deal with questions of organ donations, bioethics, in vitro fertilization, electricity, solar energy, cloning, using methods or concept that never existed before? All these things could only be understood by a contemporary judge. But not only when we speak about progress, but also when we speak about the unique conditions of each and every community. We cannot expect a rabbi who lives in Israel and never visited the diaspora to understand the problems of communities in the diaspora. And a community in North America is not the same as a community in South America. And even in South America, each community has its own specific conditions. So the contemporary judge is an extremely important concept in the Torah and later on, even in rabbinic literature, but it was overshadowed by the argument that Ashofet Asher B'Yamim includes, the contemporary judge includes written opinions. So they say, it's true that, let's say, in your town, there's one rabbi who's alive and can give you a judgment, but there are thousands of rabbis who are available to you through their books. But this is incorrect, as we'll see when we deal with the development of halakhic literature. It is not to say that we do not respect the opinions and the practices and the ideas that were transmitted to us by the previous generations, but rather that we have to examine and investigate each and every concept to see what is applicable today and what is not, what is midoraita, what is midarabanan, what is a later practice, and in cases that even the biblical concept is impossible to keep, how do we work around it to make sure that people could live normally? And that was done before. One of the most famous cases is the case of Hadash, the new grains that, according to Torah, cannot be eaten until the following Pesach. But when Jews settled in northern France and Germany, there were no other crops for them, and they, without the new tevuah, without the new grains, they would not have been able to survive. And that was where the rabbis took the initiative and studied the writings of their predecessors all the way back to the Talmud to decide that we could reinterpret the words of the Torah as saying that this this law of Hadash only applies in Eretz Yisrael and not outside Eretz Yisrael. So that is where we see a bold movement and an active engagement of the rabbis in trying to solve a situation with hands-on. This is what we need. We need judges and rabbis who know what to do and know where to use their knowledge to solve real crises in real time. So that is, as I said, in chapter 17, verses 8 to 12. The next paragraph speaks about the king. As we mentioned before, the Torah is against monarchy. Even though we read through the book of Melachim of all the royal dynasties, it's obvious that the Torah and the Tanakh are against monarchy. It was clear from the book of Bamidbar that shows that any system of government is bound to fail. And it's obvious from the narrative, even if the Torah speaks about the option of appointing a king, but later on when we go through Shmuel and we see that the prophet is unhappy with the request of the people to have a king, and when we see the disastrous results of all monarchies, whether it's the Davidic dynasty that later on is tarnished with Shlomo and his descendants, whether it is the northern kingdom that breaks away from the southern kingdom and produces 17 dynasties of kings, with each one of them lasting maybe 2 or 3 generations, we realize that monarchy is not the ideal way of life. What is important is the Torah says that if you come to the land and if you want a king, then you have to appoint a king that should be one of your brethren. Lo tuchal alecha ish nochi, should not be a foreigner, and that is because that man has to adhere to the Torah. Should not have too many horses. Should not practice polygamy. That is in line of what we mentioned before. The Torah is against polygamy or bigamy, and the guiding light for that king should be Mishneh Torah. He has to write the book of Devarim, which is called Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah, on a scroll and read it constantly to make sure that he adheres to the words of the Torah. So with that, we'll conclude that session. We are now at the beginning of chapter 18 of Devarim.